Man, that song speaks to my soul. Today we're talking about pleasers. And if there's something inside of a pleaser, we want other people to want us and want to please us as much as we want to please others. And that comes with a lot of benefits. For those of you who are pleasers, we have a heart toward wanting to give and wanting to serve. But it also comes with a lot of downsides, because often people don't want to please us as much as we think they should. And because we don't want to cause anxiety in other people, we have a tendency to sometimes fudge the truth, not lie about some things so we don't make people upset, because we want to avoid conflict, we want to avoid people getting angry. We're givers, but we're not always the best receivers. And we're going to talk about that today in our series, Get a Clue. And speaking of giving, one of the things that this time of year is great for is a chance of giving. So as you came in today, you saw our giving tree set up by the fireplace. And this is a chance for us to give to families, both here, near, and far, City Gospel Mission, Happy Church, families that will not have Christmas gifts unless someone gives to them. So if you'd like to please somebody, if you'd like to be part of changing a family's life or being with them this Christmas, grab one of the tags off the giving tree and make that part of your Christmas experience. But pleasers, like I said, there's something about being married to a pleaser. If you're a pleaser, you can't imagine what would be better than being married to you. But pleasers can be irritating, because often a pleaser so wants to not fight that they may apologize too quickly just to get it over with. They may not tell you exactly how they feel because they're scared that they might cause a conflict. They might give so much they resent that they're giving because no one's giving in the same way in return. So being married to a pleaser, trying to have a dialogue with the pleaser, sometimes can feel a lot like a runaround, because you get a little bit of truth and a little bit of lie and a whole lot of what's really going on here. But we're a lot of fun.
I look around and everyone is so negative, so cynical, so down. They see life like it's a crime scene. I say, life is a game. Let me show you how to have fun. I wrote the textbook on keeping people happy. I'm most comfortable when I'm teaching or leading or encouraging. My curriculum is games, jokes, activities, and everyone in my class gets an A. My family calls me the happiness guru. And I generally like to anticipate their needs and provide for them. The downside is that I struggle with conflict. And I tend to close the book on relationships when someone gets confrontational or emotional. When my kids talk back, it crushes me. I would never talk to my parents like that. And I don't understand my husband. I mean, he seems annoyed more than grateful for everything that I do. I think he resents me having fun in life. What's it going to take to earn a passing grade in my relationships?
So the pleaser. We're going to talk about the upsides and the downsides of being a pleaser. Our series, we've been looking at the life of Isaac and his family. And with that, we've also been looking at some attachment research and psychology from an author, Kay and Milan, who wrote a book called How We Love. I called up Kay this week. I just happened to get a hold of her through a whole series of connections. And I said, now, you're an avoider. You married a pleaser. I'm talking this week about a pleaser. Tell me a little about some of the insights that you've had as a counselor for many years with pleasers. And she tells a story in the book. She said that often she'll have pleasers, especially new moms who are pleasers, will come into her office, sit down on the couch, and as they begin to talk, they'll say, I'm a new mom, and I've never been so angry. And she says, well, it's very common for pleasers. Why? Because you were such a adjustable kid that you want to make everybody happy. You've now raising normal kids who like to push boundaries and like to rebel and don't always want to please. And the reason that comes across so offensively to you is because you think to yourself, I would never talk to my parents this way. I can't believe my kids are talking to me this way. And it feels personal. It feels shocking. And because you don't have really a box for this, you're responding in anger, and you're not even comfortable with the emotion of anger, and so you're not sure what to do with it. She said, let me help you take some steps, and we're going to do that too. It's hard to describe the inner turmoil inside of a pleaser when people are not happy. I had one this week. So this week I had a good friend called me up, asked if they could have some help. I quickly sent an email to answer this and try and be really responsive. And because of tone and email, it blew up. And so this person was hurt. And I was like, I was trying to do a favor. And what was amazing, as much as I've worked through my pleasing tendencies over the years, and as much as I felt like there was a little bit of where the tone was the problem and a little bit was me, it was amazing in the background how much anxiety. Like I couldn't, as intellectually I could say, this is not a big deal. This is, in the background, that was just going on. Conflict. Somebody's mad at you. Somebody's mad at you. Somebody's mad at you. And so I went to do a follow-up phone call to apologize, because it's easy for us pleasers to apologize. Even if we don't want to work through everything, we want to quickly resolve it all. So we apologize very easily. Doesn't mean we always get to the heart of everything. So I apologized, tried to own my part. Still, somebody's mad at me. Somebody's mad at me. So I followed up with another email saying, hey, I'd really rather talk in person. Here's where I felt like I owned my part, and then I forced myself to do what pleasers aren't good at doing. I wrote words like, the way you responded to me made me sad, and actually mad that you didn't give me more than the benefit of the doubt. And I'm trying to press send. But I know those words, I am sad and mad, are going to potentially cause more division or more heartache. But I want to have a real friendship, and this goes against... And I sent it. And I got a phone call a little bit later, said, can we talk? And we had the best conversation. Where there were apologies on both sides. Our friendship is stronger now because of it. But my instinct was to not even say where I might be coming from. So if you're a pleaser, or you're raising a pleaser, or married to a pleaser, here are some characteristics. And again, in some areas you might find yourself a pleaser, even if it's not your primary motivation. Pleasers are fearful of failure and fearful of criticism, primarily because they grew up being fearful of their parents' reaction. That doesn't mean their parents were bad necessarily. My mom was a pleaser, one of the most wonderful, caring people I know. But because she was a pleaser, she could get anxious about things. And so as a pleaser who had a mom who was a pleaser, I didn't want to make mom upset. So I had a tendency to not to talk about when I was really disappointed, to talk about when I was angry, because I didn't want to cause stress to mom. So it doesn't mean you came from a chaotic environment, but it could be your parents' particular style create a style within you. Other times you became a pleaser because there was chaos around you. They experience a parental swing if you grew up under a vacillator. Huge swing. At one moment they're angry and explosive. The next moment, oh my gosh, highly nurturing. They're right next to you. Oh, I'm going to hang out today. And then poof, they blow up. As a pleaser, you're on this roller coaster not knowing what to expect. And at moments they were hovering over you, felt your needs of attention and appreciation so met. And then when they blew up, sent you to your room, didn't talk to you for 3 days. The level of loneliness and anxiety and pain that puts into a pleaser is almost inexpressible. Pleasers also, as a child, learned they need to be good, to perform well, to earn approval. As my brother and sister say, it's tough to live up to Chad. He was always perfect. Which is true. That's one of the few degrees of discernment that my brother and sister ever had, actually. They struggle with panic or worry to the point of catastrophe. Pleasers are givers, but they're not really good receivers because they don't articulate what they need. Anger is a very underdeveloped emotion in a pleaser. Anger is a separating emotion. It separates people, and so they don't use it. They don't know how to process it. They minimize conflict, but not in the same way our avoider does. Our avoider minimizes conflict. Everything's fine because I don't want to talk about it. Our pleaser says everything's fine because I can't imagine, I don't know how to deal with the fact that we'd be upset with one another. A couple more characteristics of pleasers, and you might start recognizing these in your family too. Pleasers are always the giver. So they've taught themselves not to receive, despite they do have needs. So preserving a conflict-free household becomes most important than expressing needs. So they struggle with setting boundaries. They often allow themselves to be overextended or used or even abused. But they are good news junkies, which makes them very fun and sometimes very annoying. They see themselves as optimistic, but they often live in denial, and they ignore sadness and conflict and anger. They're frequently the good kid making up for the bad kid in the family. And one of the hearts of this, as we develop this today, is to understand, again, like I've done with each of these characters, I want you to have some compassion for the pleaser. And then, as a pleaser, learn how things that you think are strengths could also be weaknesses. In fact, they are. See, the security of a pleaser is tied to the security of somebody else. And that's where the inner anxiety comes from. I'm happy if you're happy with me. I feel good about myself if my boss feels good about me. I feel good about me if my kids seem to be obeying and giving good vibes to me. When my marriage is doing well, I'm doing well. And because of that, I'm always checking, how we doing, how we doing, how we doing, how we doing? Because my inner joy, my inner happiness is tied actually to your expression of happiness. And you can just imagine a scenario now of a pleaser getting married to an avoider who doesn't express any emotion. And they're always checking, something's wrong here in the inner turmoil. Married to a vacillator, where anger is a separating emotion they avoid. Now anger's coming out all the time, and it's just devastating to the pleaser. Imagine a victim married to a pleaser, and the victim gets their needs met by being incessantly unhappy. Because when I'm unhappy, I get attention. And a pleaser is wearing themselves out trying to please. And no matter what they do, their spouse, their son, their daughter, their coworker is never happy. The turmoil created here. And how do we solve that? And how do we make some progress with that? I want to look at two truths, and I want to look at three applications. And as we do that, what I'm hoping is that as a pleaser, we can move past superficial relationships, which we're good at, and through the tunnel of chaos into genuine relationships that'll be deeper. Truth number one. Professor Pleaser learned early on with his parents a because you kind of love. And so Esau in our family of Isaac is our pleaser. So the boys grew up, Jacob our vacillator and Esau our pleaser. And he learned early on that the way you get needs for attention and comfort and celebration in your family is you perform well. You please dad. And his father Isaac, it says, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field. Jacob was a mild man dwelling in tents. But Isaac, his dad, loved Esau because of the game he brought in, because of what a great hunter he was, because of how well he performed, because of the nice meals he did. So he learned that the way to feel loved and to get loved in his family is because you perform well. Well, then you can imagine he got really good at performing. Some of us perform by telling jokes to relieve stress. Of us perform by, kicking soccer goals or dance recitals. But we found a way that we could get loved by pleasing. And that's what Esau finds as well. But what happens when your pleasing doesn't work and people aren't pleased that you're pleasing? They're irritated or they're frustrated or they're kind of annoyed by that. That same pleaser can fall off the deep end because of the inner anxiety. I did my first wedding. It was on a beach. I was 22, I think. 23. This year I was just born. And so we went down to the beach. There's some good friends I'd known from elementary school. And we actually set rocks on the beach. And that was our center aisle that she was going to walk down. Beautiful Savannah Beach near Hilton Head area. And they came down the aisle and they committed to love each other, till death do they part. Facebook came out a few years later. And so I didn't keep up with them as much except through Facebook. But what I noticed about the wife, a friend of mine, is that every Facebook post, life was perfect. Oh, my perfect husband. It's so great to be married to him. Like, I grew up next to that guy, let me tell you. Not, a nice guy, yeah, not perfect. Had 3 boys. You read the Facebook post? Never fought. They were the love of her life. Always telling stories how wonderful everything was. And I'm like, either she got something that we all need, or she is not in touch with reality. And she was a giver. She devoted her life to her husband and to her kids. Give, 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 give. And then something happened. Where all of a sudden, she leaves her spouse, loses 50 pounds, moves in with a boyfriend, and doesn't even want to hang out with the kids. She goes from being devoted to them to now they're a nuisance in her life. And we're all like, what happened? Having created a facade where she gave, and then resented that her needs weren't being met, she then came to a breaking point to say, fine, I'm going to go finally get my needs met because this hasn't worked out. And you're going to see the same thing happen in Esau's life. So what happens is that because a pleaser doesn't know how to deal with sadness and doesn't like to deal with anger, that they medicate it. And one of the ways Esau medicates it is with sex, sexual intimacy. Now, this certainly can happen in the context of pornography and things like that, but it certainly can actually happen within even a healthy marriage as well. Because a pleaser doesn't know how to deal with sadness, they want to quickly not feel sad. And so what you find is Esau has his first breaking point with his family. He marries a woman they're not real happy with. And they're not real happy with them, so much so that they say that this marriage was a grief of mind to them. In fact, it's a Hebrew phrase that means a bitter wind. Hey, it's great to meet the new fiance. What a bitter wind you brought into our family. Well, this begins to create some uneasiness, and you'll see how this cascades for a moment. But what you'll find is that because you don't want to feel sad, you medicate that. And even in our marriage, there's been times where, is it about making love and being with you, or is it about getting me out of a bad mood? And nobody wants to feel like they're a medication. Nobody wants to feel like a thing. And I'm not saying there aren't times that we can comfort each other and love each other, or even make love because it's a way of being in the moment. I'm not saying I'm against that. But when there becomes a pattern that you're using something, shopping, spending, sex, healthy or unhealthy, when you use something to keep from feeling a feeling you don't want to feel, there's a problem. And Esau, you're going to see that problem cascade. And here's what happens in a pleaser. 2, when the pleasing doesn't work, they are devastated at a level they may not even be able to articulate. It's so devastating. So, remember, he learned early on when he was 15, Dad loves me because I perform well. So he's out hunting. He's out hunting one day. I got to find Dad's meal. Dad's about to write me into the will and write the big check for the inheritance. So he goes and finds Dad's big game and Dad's big meal, takes the time and he skins it and he prepares it and he brings it to Dad. Dad, here's the meal. Bless me. Time for the big check of inheritance. And Dad is troubled because he just wrote the big check to the guy he thought was Esau. And Esau, who's pleasing has worked his whole life, comes with this pleasing gift, this pleasing aroma, this thing he fought and the thing he gave. And his dad says, I don't have anything to give you. And Esau lets out a great and bitter cry. And I think that is a great way to describe what happens in a pleaser when pleasing doesn't work. It is a deep and great, devastating cry. How can this not work? This is how I get my appreciation. This is how I get blessed. This is how I get my comfort. And now that he's feeling sadness and anger, what do you think the thing he does next is? He marries more women. If this pleasing doesn't work, blow up. Fine, I did everything I tried to do. It didn't work. I'll just go do whatever I want to. Finally, I'm going to get my needs met. My whole life, all I've done is give, and no one's ever given to me. Blow up and goes the other direction. And Esau saw that his dad blessed Jacob. Jacob? He's like the hard kid. He's a difficult kid. He's getting blessed. And he goes and marries additional wives to medicate the pain. Now, one, this is helpful for you to understand inside you, if you're a pleaser, oh, wow, I am really not comfortable with sadness and anger. And I'm medicating it instead of processing it. If you're married to or raising a pleaser, you just don't realize how painful separation feels. So even in conflict, there's a sensitivity I'm going to talk about in a moment on how you can help bring some of that out. Truth number two. Truth number two is that pleasers have a tendency to wear themselves out trying harder in the short term while neglecting their long-term needs. A good example of this would be when Esau's 15. He's wearing himself out. He's 15 years old. I got to be the best. I got to get the best. I got to get the right game. I got to bring things home so Dad will love me because Dad will love me so Dad will love me. He's so worn out. He hasn't eaten in a while. He's neglected his own needs. He's worn out. Oh. He's on his way home, starving to death, and here's his vacillator brother. Hey, you look hungry. Oh, my goodness, I'm so hungry. I just forgot to even eat the last couple days. I just give. Well, listen, you look like you're in pain. I'd be delighted to help if you trade your long-term inheritance to me. So he's worn himself out in the short term, and now he neglects his long-term needs. His inheritance he trades for a bowl of soup. And this is why often you see pleasers who midlife just sort of go crazy because they never learned how to articulate their needs, and suddenly they resent all the giving they've been doing, and they can't believe everybody else is annoyed by their giving. But if you're married to a giver, you sense that there's a string attached, that yes, they're giving, but they're trying to get their need for appreciation met. Ask my wife, she'll tell you. So compassionately, one of the ways we can do better is that we can begin to understand what's going on inside of our spouse. Again, I was talking to Kay in Milan, Kay specifically, about their material, and she says in the book one of the most pivotal moments in their marriage. One of those moments was that she grew up as a sad baby. If you remember a few weeks ago, I talked about the avoider. Her mom described her as a glum baby. Thank you, Mom. And she never really learned how to process her sadness because everybody's always trying to cheer her up rather than enter in. So she started going through counseling as an avoider to start dealing with and learning how to deal with that. Every time she came home, Milan, the pleaser, would turn to Kay and say, "So, how'd it go? You feel like you're over the hump?" Annoyed her to death. No, I don't know that I'm over the hump. I don't know that I'm going to be over the hump. In fact, I may never be over the hump. And if you're a pleaser, there could not be more difficult, worse words than the hump is never going to go away. And he's feeling all this anxiety, scared to death, he said. And he was praying that night, God, just really help me. I need to help be better in this relationship. And he said God gave him a dream or impression, whatever you want to call it, of a street lamp with a 6-year-old little girl underneath it that was his wife, who was sad. And nobody knew how to meet her and be with her in her sadness. And the light was slowly fading on that street lamp. And he felt like God was saying, if you don't learn how to meet your wife, the Bible calls it weeping with those who weep. If you don't know how to meet your wife in her sadness, the light of her love is slowly fading. He was struck by this, even though it terrified him. He called his wife up at the office. I want to talk tonight. And they talked. He said, I'll share what I feel like God told me. And God told me I'm supposed to learn how to love that little girl and to meet her in her sadness, not just make her happy. And Kay said it's one of the first times she wept in front of him. First time she felt like, you get it. Stop trying to fix me and be with me in my loneliness. And that became the pathway for their progress. So how do we do that? 3 applications. Application number 1, if you're a pleaser, is you need to do some detective work inside yourself and realize that all conflict is not murder. All sadness is not murder. Because when you see people sad, you jump up. It's happy time. Let's play a game. Not all conflict is murder. And yet in your mind it is. And so you avoid it, you run away from it, you judge it, you determine it as bad. Why can't more people be like me? Because all conflict is murder. And when you feel the anxiety coming up in you, you need to remind yourself, all right, it's okay for people to be sad. You go and see the movie Inside Out, and you're like, I was so frustrated at that movie. Well, I believed in it. The sadness is the good guy in this thing. Not all conflict is murder. And specifically, let me get some details. Not all emotions are weapons. And there are some things in the pleaser's mindset that you have determined are weapons. It's actually driving your spouse crazy. Because you think anger is always wrong. You think conflict's always wrong. And so the whole time your spouse, who may not be handling it well, but is expressing emotions that actually are healthy, you're judging those because they are always inappropriate. They're always inappropriate weapons. And so it's not allowing for actual real conflict. Let me give you 4 examples of that from Esau's life. Number one of the weapons that does not need to, that it needs to be in a healthy relationship is healthy conflict. And so a pleaser needs to learn how to pursue healthy conflict for the sake of themselves and the next generation. You need to pursue learning how to admit your needs, admit when you're mad, trusting that your commitment to each other will be worth going through this tunnel together. Not just for yourself, so you can have a deeper relationship, but for the sake of the next generation. Your kids need to see how people work through conflict. Certainly it's true in Jacob's life. Jacob and Esau have not talked now for 14 years, plus or minus a little bit more. 14 years they've been separated. And they decide, through God's prompting, to reconcile manipulation and lying and deceit and all kinds of terrible stuff that have happened. At high risk to himself, Jacob follows God's advice to try and reconcile with Esau. And when they come to that moment where they articulate their apologies to one another and they embrace one another, the Bible records that when these 2 brothers embraced, Joseph and Rachel were near. So what? So when these 2 grown men were having healthy conflict and learning how to process that to bring each other back together, there's this little boy named Joseph who's watching. Who cares? Because 20 years later, that little boy will grow up, 20 chapters later, and he will be second in command in Egypt as a pharaoh. He would have gotten there because his brothers threw him into a pit, sold him off into slavery, falsely accused, thrown in prison, and ultimately raised to the second command. And now there'll be a great famine in all of the Israelite Hebrew land, and they will move to Egypt to get provided. And now the brother they thought they killed and deceived has a chance to pay them back. And do you know what he does? He forgives them. I wonder how or where he got the idea that a brother could forgive a brother. Now, he doesn't just jump in. He tests them. This passage was so powerful to me 4 years ago now. I was doing a TV interview in Hollywood when my book came out, and my brother lives in Hollywood, and my brother and I had not talked for 5 years at that point. I had made regular attempts to try and reconcile. I could constantly feel in the background the inner turmoil of not having resolution. I made some attempts, and ultimately he said he'd be willing to meet with me when I came into Hollywood. And I'm not a morning person. And the only time he could meet was at 5 a.m. at this place that looked like Mel's Diner, if you remember that TV show. And if you don't worry about it. Kiss my grits, Mel. So anyway, my son was with me on that trip, and I said, Javen, I really would like you to come with me to the most awkward conversation you're ever going to look at. You don't need to say anything. But I think it's important for you to watch 2 grown men who disagree, care enough about their relationship to work through that. As a pleaser, everything about this is horrible. And I said, Javen, after we're done talking, I want you to tell me if you feel like I was humble, open, or defensive. He sat, as for an hour, that 5 o'clock that morning, my brother and I worked through our relationship that we're now talking. We've been talking now for 3 or 4 years. Do we agree on everything? No. Did we agree on some stuff? Yes. Did we apologize for some stuff? Yes. And it was torturous to me. In fact, after we got done talking, he goes into the bathroom, and I burst into tears. And my son, who's an avoider, he's like, Dad, are you okay? I'm fine. I'm fine. This is just really hard for me. We've got to learn how to do this for the sake of the next generation. We're not going to do it perfect, but we've got to show our kids how to really work through conflict in a healthy way. And what's amazing is right after Jacob and Esau do that, the very next passage is that Jacob goes and dwells in a place called Sukkot, in a tent. And here in Sukkot, he puts up this tent. And this idea that God showed up in the conflict was so powerful that God dwells with us in conflict. God steps into those situations if you have a humble heart. That the word Sukkot from this passage becomes the thing Moses picks up and calls one of the 7 Jewish feasts the Feast of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacle, which is still celebrated to this day in Israel. People spend a whole week and they move out of their house and they live in a tent for a week to remind themselves that God dwells with us and that we can be thankful that God will still enter into situations just like he did with Jacob and Esau. God can show up in conflict. And conflict doesn't always have to be a weapon, even though it feels like it. Second, a pleaser needs to realize that sadness is not a weapon to be avoided. What's amazing is that Jacob and Esau, as they are here grieving 14 years of lost relationship, grieving manipulation and threats of killing you, I mean, there's some real bad stuff. And that passage ends by saying, and they wept. They wept over their regrets. They regret over their own mistakes. They regret over the wasted time that their kids never got to visit the other kids. They don't even know their cousins. They learned how to be sad for the sake of a real relationship. And that's why instead of trying to fix and make everybody happy all the time, it's okay to make people feel happy, but if you're doing it all the time, then it's because you're not comfortable with sadness. You know how to rejoice for those who rejoice, but you know how to weep with those who weep. And that's a skill that God's going to want you to develop in order to have a real, genuine relationship. Because people are going to sense the superficiality of you just avoiding sadness all the time. Third, it's not just conflict, it's also anger. For a pleaser, anger is such a separating emotion. And here's what we think as pleasers. We think if I get angry, it's always wrong. Anger's always wrong. It means you hate somebody. And if you hate somebody, even Jesus said, you hate somebody in your heart, you're killing them. So obviously, anger is not something God would want you to do. Because anger leads to hating, and hating in your heart, Jesus says, is the same as killing him in your heart. And Esau hated Jacob for what he did. Hated him for taking that blessing. Hated him, and the net result was, if I hate him, then I'm going to kill him. And that's because you don't know how to deal with anger. And so anger feels like a weapon, and so stay away from it because it always leads to bad places. But did you know the Bible commands us to be angry? Letting that sink into us pleasers, that just sounds like, no, Satan maybe said that. But in the book of Ephesians, it says, be angry. But in expressing your anger, don't be wayward about it, or don't be sinful about it, or don't be unhealthy about it, or don't be destructive with it means. So this summer I was praying, and I was just asking God for some wisdom on a situation. I was laying in bed one night, and Beth was getting ready, and I was reading through my Bible, and I felt like, if I flip to the page, or call it a nudging, call it circumstance, whatever you're going to call it, I'm going to call it a nudging, a leading. God led me to a passage in the Bible in Psalms, chapter 4, verse 4. And I felt God was saying, here's something I want you to use right now in that situation. I'm not sure I knew anything that was in Psalms 4 prior to that moment. Got to verse 4, and it says, be angry. And actually the Hebrew translates, be irritated. Well, us pleasers, we don't like irritated people. And it's a command. Be angry, be irritated, but in your irritation, in your anger, do not be destructive. So when you lay down in your bed at night, trust in the Lord, etc., etc., etc. And this was the perfect word I needed. Because there's some things going on that I was angry about, and I was suppressing it. No, God said, be angry, but now figure out how to express it in a way that is not destructive. And it's like batting left-handed, having anger in my hand. I would feel silly getting angry. Though I get angry, expressing it feels like I'm batting left-handed. I'm not comfortable with that emotion. I've gotten a lot better at it. Not great at it, but I've got better at it over the years as I've realized it's not a weapon. Fourth, because the security of a pleaser is tied to someone else's security, we're hanging out with people all the time. I'm not saying we're always extroverts, but a lot of us are. Because I find out how I'm doing by who's around me tells me how I'm doing it. So we don't know how to be alone very well, which annoys the heck out of the people in our family. We do want to play games. We do want to hang out. And there's nothing wrong with those pieces, except that sometimes we need to learn another tool that's not a weapon. The difference between aloneness and loneliness. As you track through Esau's life, he takes another wife in addition to. He just keeps going through women and adding more to his collection to medicate the pain. He doesn't know how to be alone. Almost all the attachment research shows that one of the things the pleaser needs to work on is learning how to be alone without being lonely. And maybe that's a distinction you never heard before. I came across it in 94, and I've thought about it since 94. What does it mean to be alone? Aloneness, to rejuvenate, to refill, to reflect, and not necessarily assign that to loneliness. So then I want to spend time with you because I want to spend time with you, not because I'm really using my time with you to meet an inner black hole within me. I don't want the people in my life just to be in addition to moments. I want to be filled up enough that I'm giving to them, not giving so that I can take from them. Lastly, if you're married to a pleaser, or you're raising a pleaser, or you work with pleasers, we have a lot of pleasers on our staff besides me, you need to, 3, learn how to create reassuring rooms in your conversations. We have several pleasers on our team, and I know in general if we have a conflict over a decision we're going to make for a service or a decision we're going to make for a strategic, I am not going to hear their opinion in that meeting because it might cause conflict, especially if it's different. So part of creating a reassuring room is I have to chase that person down and say, hey, I really didn't get a chance to hear your opinion in the meeting. Seemed like, just reading your body language, that maybe you weren't fully on board. No, it's fine. They're not going to tell you the truth the first time. You got to create real sure. No, I really want to know your opinion. Even if you totally disagree, I really think it's important. Even if we don't do it, I really want to know where you disagree here. Well, I just think maybe, and then you're going to hear like 10% of their disagreement. And if it's safe, because if you're a pleaser, all this is, you're going to be like, well, I kind of thought we could have, and you create a little more, well, tell me more. And you're going to have to just tiptoe the pleaser out of their cave of acceptance if you really want to find out what's going on. Which is why, especially when pleasers are married to vacillator's, there's bombs going off there. Hey, I'll be in the cave! So learning how to regulate yourself to bring out the pleaser child, to bring out the pleaser spouse, you need to create a reassuring room. So one of the things my wife and I have done over the years is even when we're having conflict, there's a phrase that helps me regulate myself. And we're probably batting 50-50 on it, which is better because we used to not have the tool and not bad at all. When we're in a conflict, if she can say, listen, I'm angry right now, we're okay, but I don't want to talk about it. That little phrase, we're okay. It doesn't feel okay. Conflict doesn't feel okay. Disagree doesn't feel okay. But that is a gift she gives me. It's a gift. And it's hard to say that when you're annoyed at a pleaser. But that's why I'm trying to give you compassion. If you realize the inner anxiety in a pleaser, you can actually calm them down so they're not chasing you around the house trying to resolve, because that's what they're doing. There's conflict, we got to resolve, and you're the avoider. Run out of here, you're out of here, I'm out of here, and they're chasing you, right? They're chasing you around. Come on, we're going to resolve this. I'm not going to be happy until you're happy, right? So if you want them to stop chasing you, shortcut, we're okay right now. I'm just angry and need some space. That little nugget will just give them enough to go, okay, get their anxiety a little bit down. If you want to throw them 2 nuggets, if you're an avoider, this is the last thing you're going to think about, but it'll save you from an hour conversation. So think of it that way. If you want to avoid it, here's the quickest way to avoid it. We're okay right now. We'll talk about it later for 10 minutes. Because otherwise, when are we going to talk about? When are we going to talk about this? When are we going to talk about this? When are we going to talk about this? And thirdly, and I mentioned this because my daughter Sierra is 20 and she's a pleaser. And I mentioned this, I think, 4 or 5 months ago. She came home from college, and one of the things I realized is, as a pleaser, I was very much a let's be happy when there's conflict. And I said, what are you learning from the counselor you're going to in college? And she said, I'm learning that you have a tendency to always make things fun, but I don't know how to deal with grief very well. I'm like, that sounds like me. I said, I realized it when you were in high school, and I started making some changes, but I realized I spent a lot of the time being good at rejoicing with those who rejoice, but not good at weeping with those who weep. And we're just having some great dialogue as 2 pleasers on how we can learn both skills the Bible offers. Rejoicing with those who rejoice, and loving each other, trusting each other enough that even if we disagree. And so that reassuring room I've created with my daughter is many times when she's mad, I'll just keep saying, you got to be mad at me right now. Tell me all about it. Okay? Well, if I was you, I'd be annoyed that I did this. I'm giving voice to her annoyance and letting her know it's a safe place. Our relationship and God's succoting, God's tabernacling in this moment will be better because of it. So if you're a pleaser, married to a pleaser, working with pleasers, there's so much good that can happen if you learn those 3 applications and begin to say, God, I want our relationships to be deeper than just superficial. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for the good work you've been doing in me over the last couple of years in this issue. And I pray for each family here that if they've got pleaser kids with tender hearts, they would be careful with those hearts, that they would be instructive with those hearts. God, you would teach all of us how we can make the adaptations we need to really love people the way you love people. And entering in, tabernacling in to wherever we are. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. We'll see you all next week.